I still remember the moment, because it was the only time I'd ever watched an entire ballroom laugh at me before I'd even taken my seat. "Let's hear it for my girls," my father, Richard Bennett, boomed into the microphone, standing beneath a glittering chandelier while nearly 200 wedding guests applauded. He wrapped one arm around my younger sister, Claire. "This one," he said proudly, gesturing toward her, "gave us a beautiful family." Another round of applause. Then he turned toward me. "And this one," he grinned so widely I recognized the expression immediately. It was the same smile he wore whenever he thought humiliation counted as humor. "She's not married, but she's always good for the bill." The room exploded with laughter. Someone even clinked a champagne glass. Several guests looked directly at me, smiling as though I were supposed to laugh too. I didn't. I simply stood beside the ballroom entrance, holding the wedding gift I'd purchased 3 months earlier, wondering why my chest suddenly felt so tight. Richard wasn't finished. "If this wedding costs another 10 grand before midnight," he laughed into the microphone, "don't worry, we brought the family ATM." His finger pointed straight at me. More laughter. Claire lowered her eyes. She didn't stop him. She didn't even look at me. The photographer swung his camera toward my face, waiting for the embarrassed smile everyone expected. Instead, I noticed something far stranger. My name wasn't anywhere on the seating chart beside the ballroom doors. Guests stepped around me while searching for their assigned tables. "Bennett, Bennett." One elderly aunt frowned. "That's odd." Another cousin whispered, "Maybe Maureen couldn't RSVP." I walked closer. Every member of my family had a place. Even distant relatives I'd met only once had assigned seats. Mine wasn't there. A young hostess approached with an uncomfortable smile. "I'm so sorry, Ms. Bennett." She glanced at a clipboard. "We actually have you seated with the vendors." "The vendors?" She nodded apologetically. "It's the only place assigned under your name." Before I could ask another question, applause erupted again as Richard lifted his champagne glass for another toast. The humiliation wasn't accidental. It had been planned. And somehow, I had the feeling the missing seat was only the beginning. The reception had been held at one of the most prestigious country clubs in the city, the kind of place where every centerpiece looked like it belonged in a magazine, and every place setting cost more than most people spent on groceries in a week. I'd helped pay for much of it. Not because anyone had forced me. Because Dad had called me 6 months earlier sounding defeated. "Claire's wedding budget collapsed," he'd told me. "If we can't cover the deposits, they'll lose the venue." I'd wired the money without hesitation. Then another request came. Flowers. Then catering. Then entertainment. Every time, Dad promised the family would repay me once several business deals closed. I never questioned him. Family wasn't supposed to keep score. Apparently, family also wasn't supposed to appear on the seating chart. I followed the hostess toward a lonely round table tucked beside the service entrance, where DJs, photographers, and vendors drifted in and out between assignments. One florist looked up as I sat down. "Oh," she said with visible relief. "You're finally here." I frowned. "Were you expecting me?" She exchanged a quick glance with the banquet manager. "We've been trying to find you all afternoon." Before I could answer, another vendor approached carrying a folder. "Ms. Bennett." "Yes." "Could you approve the remaining balances before dinner service begins?" I stared at him. "The remaining what?" He looked confused. "The outstanding wedding invoices." Around us, the music continued. Guests laughed. Champagne glasses clinked. On stage, my father was telling another joke. Then the banquet manager hurried toward me carrying a thick cream-colored envelope stamped in bold black letters. He placed it gently in front of me. "Ms. Bennett, you'll need this immediately." Across the front were 4 words that made my stomach drop. I carried the envelope into the empty hallway outside the ballroom before opening it. The music faded behind the closed doors. Inside were invoices from the caterer, florist, lighting company, band, and venue. Every single page carried the same line near the bottom. Financial guarantor, Maureen. I read it twice, then a third time. No. I flipped through the stack faster. Every document listed my name. Every unpaid balance had somehow become my responsibility. I hadn't signed any of them. I hadn't even seen them before. A voice behind me interrupted my thoughts. There you are. Dad. He walked into the hallway carrying a glass of champagne, still smiling from his speech. What is this? I asked, holding up the invoices. He barely glanced at them. Oh, those. Oh, those. They're just temporary. Temporary. You know how vendors get before events. I stared at him. My name is on every single guarantee. He took a casual sip of champagne. I needed someone reliable. You needed my permission. You would have said yes. No, I replied calmly. I would have asked questions. His smile faded for the first time that evening. Maureen. This isn't the time. I folded the papers carefully. When exactly were you planning to tell me I'd apparently become legally responsible for half this wedding? He lowered his voice. After tonight. You mean after I paid them? He didn't answer. Instead, he glanced toward the ballroom doors. Claire can't handle any drama today. This isn't drama. This is family. I laughed once. A short, disbelieving laugh. You embarrassed me in front of 200 people. It was a joke. You pointed at me. They laughed because they know you can afford it. I wasn't laughing. He sighed as though I were the difficult one. You're 36. Successful. Single. You don't have children. You have more money than anyone else in this family. So help your sister one more time. One more time. Those words stopped me. Because I'd heard them before. 6 months earlier. Claire's florist needs another deposit. One more time. Then, the venue raised their prices. One more time. Then, the caterer needs another payment. One more time. Every transfer had come after one desperate phone call from Dad. Every time he'd promised repayment once his business stabilized. Every time I'd believed him. I looked back down at the invoices. Something didn't make sense. I already transferred you enough money to cover these vendors. His eyes shifted away for only a second. Barely noticeable. But I caught it. Before I could ask another question, footsteps echoed down the hallway. The wedding photographer hurried past carrying extra camera batteries. He slowed when he saw us. Oh, sorry. He started walking again before stopping. You know. He looked at Dad. I've never seen someone argue with so many vendors before a wedding. Dad's expression hardened. What are you talking about? The loading dock this afternoon. The photographer shrugged. I thought everything had already been paid. Silence. Dad answered too quickly. Minor scheduling issues. The photographer nodded uncertainly. If you say so. He disappeared around the corner. Dad immediately stepped closer. His voice became low. Controlled. If anyone asks. He placed a firm hand on my shoulder. You'll take care of the balances. I slowly removed his hand. No. His jaw tightened. If you love this family. He leaned so close, only I could hear him. You'll pay before dessert. I stood in the hallway for another few seconds, letting Dad's words settle. If you love this family, you'll pay before dessert. For the first time in my life, I wondered if loving my family had simply meant making their problems disappear. I slipped the invoices back into the envelope. Then I walked toward the ballroom. Dinner service had just begun. Crystal glasses sparkled beneath the chandeliers, while waiters carried plated trays between elegantly dressed guests. From a distance, everything looked perfect. Then reality caught up. Ms. Bennet, a man in a black suit, hurried across the room toward me. It was the lighting contractor. He stopped just loudly enough for nearby guests to hear. "We still need authorization before we continue tonight." Conversations around us slowed. I kept my voice calm. Authorization for what? The remaining balance. Several heads turned. The bride's relatives looked from him to me. Before I could answer, another voice joined in. "The band has the same issue." The entertainment manager had walked over. "So does the florist," someone else added. Within seconds, 3 different vendors were standing beside my table. The nearest guests had stopped eating altogether. Whispers spread through the ballroom. "What's going on? I thought everything was paid. Isn't she the attorney? I heard she's financing the wedding." Across the room, Dad noticed the growing crowd. Instead of looking concerned, he smiled. He climbed back onto the stage. "Ladies and gentlemen," he laughed into the microphone, "don't worry." He pointed directly at me again. "My oldest daughter always saves the day." More scattered laughter echoed through the ballroom. "She's been paying our family bills since she became successful." Several guests chuckled politely. Others looked uncomfortable. I didn't move. I simply looked at him. He raised his champagne glass toward me. "Isn't that right, sweetheart?" Before I could answer, the banquet manager climbed onto the stage beside him. He looked far less amused. "I'm very sorry to interrupt." His voice was professional but firm. "Unless the outstanding balances are resolved immediately, I'm required to suspend dessert service and several contracted reception services." The room fell silent. Even the musicians stopped playing. Every eye turned toward me. Claire slowly stood from the head table. Her wedding dress shimmered beneath the lights. "Maureen." She looked embarrassed. "Can you please just fix this?" There it was. Not. "What happened?" Not. "Are you okay?" Only. "Please fix it." Then the groom's mother stood. She folded her arms. I knew this would happen. She looked directly at me. "If you promise to cover expenses, you should honor your word." Several members of the groom's family nodded. Someone whispered, "This is incredibly selfish." Another guest added, "Imagine embarrassing the bride like this." For a moment, I almost reached for my purse. Old habits. Old conditioning. Dad knew exactly what he was doing. If enough people blamed me, I'd pay simply to end the scene. Then one of the catering supervisors quietly approached. "Ms. Bennet." He held out a folder. "I think you should see these." Inside were payment receipts, bank confirmations, deposit acknowledgments. Every transfer I'd sent months earlier had been received. Every vendor had signed for the money. I stared at the dates. The florist. Paid. The caterer. Paid. The venue. Paid. The lighting company. Paid. I looked up. "If you received all of these." The supervisor nodded. "We did." "Then why am I being billed again?" He hesitated before answering. "We were instructed that the original funds had been reallocated." "By whom?" He looked toward the stage. I followed his gaze. "Dad." The room suddenly felt much quieter. I finally understood. The money hadn't disappeared before reaching the vendors. It had reached them. Then something had happened afterward. Whatever Dad had done, he'd expected me to quietly pay twice. The banquet manager checked his watch. Ms. Bennett, I'm afraid we need an answer. I slowly closed the folder. No. The single word echoed farther than I'd expected. Without another sentence. Without another explanation. I turned away from my table, ignored every whisper behind me, and began walking straight toward the stage. The whispers followed me all the way to the stage. Some guests assumed I was finally going to apologize. Others expected me to pull out a credit card and quietly rescue the reception. Dad looked almost relieved. There she is, he said into the microphone with a satisfied grin. I knew my daughter wouldn't let her sister down. A few people clapped. I stopped at the foot of the stage. May I borrow the microphone? Dad chuckled. See, she's going to make everything right. He handed it to me without hesitation. I accepted it with one hand. Then I turned, not toward him, toward the vendors. The ballroom fell silent. I took a slow breath. I only have a few questions. No anger. No shouting. Just questions. I looked directly at the banquet manager. Did I personally sign any contract guaranteeing these balances? He answered immediately. No. I nodded. I turned toward the caterer. When were my original transfers received? He opened his records. Approximately 5 months ago. The florist. 6 months ago. The lighting company. Just over 4 months ago. Each answer echoed through the silent ballroom. I continued. So every major vendor received the payments I transferred months ago. Every vendor answered the same way. Yes. A ripple of confusion spread across the room. Guests looked from me to Dad. I wasn't finished. I raised another document. Then I'd like one more answer. I faced the banquet manager. Who instructed you to replace the original payment arrangements with invoices listing me as the financial guarantor? The manager hesitated. His eyes drifted toward Dad. Richard's confident smile disappeared. The manager slowly opened another folder. I was hoping this wouldn't become necessary. He removed several signed authorization forms. I was instructed to keep these confidential unless there was a dispute. He handed the paperwork to me. I didn't even need to read the signature. I recognized Dad's handwriting immediately. Instead of holding the papers for myself, I handed them back. Please read the authorization aloud. The manager adjusted his glasses. His voice shook slightly. Effective immediately, transfer all remaining vendor communications and financial responsibility to Ms. Maureen Bennett. She has agreed to resolve any outstanding balances on behalf of the Bennett family. Gasps spread through the ballroom. I never agreed to that, I said calmly. The manager nodded. I've since confirmed there is no written authorization from you. Claire slowly rose from her chair. Dad. Her voice barely carried across the room. What is he talking about? Dad forced a laugh. This is being taken completely out of context. It was just paperwork. No, I replied. It was fraud. The room became so quiet that silverware stopped moving. Dad stepped toward me. I was protecting this wedding. By putting my name on debts I never accepted. You would have paid them anyway. You decided that for me. His confidence began to crack. I intended to explain everything afterward. After I paid twice. He opened his mouth. Nothing came out. Then I reached into my purse. I brought something too. I removed my tablet. With a few taps, I projected my banking records onto the ballroom's large reception screen. Rows of transfers appeared. Each one matched the dates the vendors had already confirmed. Amount. Reference number. Recipient. Everything. I transferred every dollar my father requested. I turned back toward the guests. Not once, not twice, but over several months. No one spoke. Then the florist quietly said, "We received those deposits." The caterer nodded. "So did we." The lighting contractor added. The money was never missing. All eyes shifted back to Richard. His face had turned pale. Before he could invent another explanation, the ballroom doors opened. A middle-aged man wearing the accounting firm's identification badge walked briskly inside, carrying a thick leather ledger. He looked directly at the banquet manager. "I was told there's a dispute over the wedding accounts." He lifted the ledger onto the head table. "I believe everyone here deserves to see exactly where the money went." Every person in the ballroom leaned forward. Dad slowly lowered his head. For the first time that evening, he looked afraid. The accountant set the leather ledger on the head table with a dull thud. Every conversation in the ballroom stopped. He looked around the room before opening it. "I'm Martin Ellis," he said. "My firm was hired to reconcile the wedding accounts after several vendors reported conflicting payment instructions." Dad took one hurried step forward. "Martin, this isn't the place." Martin didn't even look at him. "Actually, Mr. Bennett." He opened the ledger. "This is exactly where your financial decisions have affected everyone." He turned several pages. "I've verified every payment Ms. Maureen Bennett made." He looked at me. "Every transfer reached the accounts your father designated." A murmur swept across the guests. Martin continued. "However," he placed another document beside the ledger. "Within days of receiving those funds, Mr. Richard Bennett instructed multiple vendors to refund portions of those deposits into a separate business account under his control." The ballroom fell completely silent. Claire stared at Dad. "What?" Martin calmly pointed to the documentation. The vendors believed the wedding budget had changed. They were told revised payments would come later. The remaining balances were then reassigned. He looked toward me. "To Ms. Bennett." The banquet manager slowly nodded. "That matches every document we have." I finally understood the entire picture. Dad hadn't stolen money directly from the vendors. He had used my money to temporarily satisfy deposits, recovered much of it for himself, and expected me to unknowingly replace it before anyone discovered the shortage. If I had quietly paid the invoices that evening, no one would have questioned where the original money went. The scheme would have worked. Claire's face turned white. She stepped away from the head table. "Dad," her voice cracked, "you told me Maureen barely helped." Richard swallowed. "I was trying to protect everyone." "Protect us?" She shook her head. "You humiliated her. You used her. You made everyone laugh at her." He reached toward her. "Claire." She took another step backward. "Don't." Across the ballroom, the groom slowly stood. He walked directly toward me. "I owe you an apology." His voice carried through the silent room. "I believed every word I heard about you." He looked toward Richard. "I won't make that mistake again." His parents remained frozen. His mother, who had accused me only minutes earlier, slowly approached. "I judged you without knowing the facts." "I'm sorry." One by one, relatives who had laughed at Dad's jokes avoided looking at me. Some quietly apologized. Others simply lowered their heads. No one laughed anymore. The vendors immediately began removing my name from every outstanding invoice. The banquet manager tore the reassigned guarantee forms in half. "We'll be pursuing payment only from the party that authorized these changes." "Richard." He looked around the ballroom, searching for someone to defend him. No one moved. His business partner, who had been seated near the front, quietly stood. "I think we need to discuss our company's finances." Another partner followed. "So do I." Neither man waited for an answer. Within minutes, they walked out of the reception together. The consequences came quickly after the wedding. The vendors filed claims against Dad for the unpaid balances and the unauthorized reassignment of financial responsibility. His partners launched an internal audit after discovering that wedding funds weren't the only transactions handled that way. Several major clients terminated their contracts before the investigation was even finished. The business he'd spent decades building began collapsing under the weight of his own decisions. Claire visited me 2 weeks later. She didn't ask for money. She didn't defend Dad. She simply said, "I should have spoken up the first time he made you the family joke." I hugged her, not because everything had been repaired, but because accountability had finally replaced silence. As for me, I changed more than my bank accounts. I stopped saying yes simply because someone shared my last name. I stopped believing love required endless sacrifice without respect. For the first time in my adult life, family stopped being measured by obligation and started being measured by honesty. Months later, I received a small envelope in the mail. Inside was the seating card from the wedding. Someone had written my name neatly across the blank front. No explanation. No signature. I smiled once, folded it in half, and placed it in the shredder. I didn't need a seat at their table anymore. I'd finally built one of my own.